Hi, so I am very excited today to introduce Dr. Lynette Strickland. She's an up-and-coming evolutionary biologist. Um, currently, she works. Currently, she is an NSF postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Biodiversity Region Research at the University of Michigan. At the University of, forgive me, just got my video working. At the University of Memphis. Her current research focuses on the evolution of phenotypic variation, and particularly color variation, and how this is related to changes in the genome. She has experience working on a variety of colorful taxa, including birds, fish, bioluminescent algae, and the neotropical tortoise beetle, which was the focus of her dissertation research at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Today, she's here to speak about a different part of her research program. Lynette has published multiple papers on the interactions between people of color and STEM research in high-profile journals. In 2017, she had a major role in a paper published in Science titled "Without Inclusion, Diversity Initiatives May Not Be Enough." The paper critically evaluated inclusion in STEM fields and identified specific areas of improvement, including the importance of allies and the importance of support for DEIJ work, which is often left to those who identify as underrepresented minorities. She continues her DEIJ work, including in 2020, where she published another paper, this time in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. The paper titled "Elevate, Don't Assimilate to Revolutionize the Experiences of Scientists Who Are Black, Indigenous, and People of Color." This paper outlines key steps that will be important to improve culture in STEM fields, and particularly address the disparity in experiences that people of color face in our fields compared to our white coworkers. Her research in the topic certainly caught the eye of our ECSS committee, so we're excited to hear what she has to share with us today, which will include, I'm sure, broadly her work as well as her personal experience, as her title suggests. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm really excited to be here today. And Nick, your talk was fantastic. So I'm going to get screen share going. Can everyone see a couple of beetles? Excellent. Okay. So again, I want to say that I'm really happy to be here and to chat with folks today. And I am hoping that this will turn into a conversation toward the end. So the goal of this talk is exploratory and almost subjective, really. And my hope for what I'll share today is that it'll inspire folks to think about the ways that their identities have influenced their science, their passions, and their interests, and to think about how that can influence the communities, scientific and otherwise, around us, and just to encourage discussions that go beyond today. And so just a brief description here. These are the tortoise beetles that I study in tropical environments, and they'll come up just a little bit toward the end of the talk today. So I want to start by kind of first addressing these two misconceptions that I feel like I see quite often. And I think they're both two different sides of the same coin. And so the first one is this sort of thought, or I hear it at least quite often when discussing or referring to the need for equity, inclusion, access in science. And it's this idea of well, science is doing great. Why do we need to focus on anything more? And so typically, I think what's being referred to is what these next two graphs will show. So this is from the STEM 2015 report. So it's almost getting close to 10 years old at this point. But what we're seeing are some ever increasing and relevant trends, right? So this is showing the growth in the number of active peer-reviewed journals. So there are just under 35,000 scholarly active peer-reviewed journals. This includes both English and non-English, although there are nearly 29,000 of those are dominantly English. So disparities in that, but that's another topic for another time. And so these journals are collectively publishing over 2.5 million articles per year. Every year, this is what we're getting. And so this is showing the increase in the number of articles that are being published every year. The different colors are representing predominant countries, and so we're seeing huge disparities in this as well. But so I feel like this is what I hear pretty often is, why do we need to do anything else when scientific output is greater than it's ever been? We're doing great, aren't we? And so I think that leads to this question is, what can a diverse, inclusive, accessible, and equitable scientific community do that a uniform, exclusive community couldn't? And so those are kind of some of the stories that I want to tell today that I think really beautifully sort of show what these kinds of communities can do and how they can influence science. And so that it sort of brings me to these three perspectives to keep in mind throughout this. So it's thinking about, what is the overarching goal when we're thinking about moving toward anti-racist research? Where is this need, and what is the outcome? And so I did say I wanted to bring up two misconceptions. So here's the other side of that coin that I feel like I see really often. And so it tends to come from very well-meaning people, departments, institutions, but people who are really trying to move towards equitable and accessible science. And so I think people often tend to think of a journey towards anti-racist science as like climbing a staircase, where a department or an institution can point out and say, oh, look, we're here. We're focusing on equity in our department. We're doing so much better than departments that are trying to diversify student bodies, right? The thing is, this is not like a staircase at all, right? The ultimate goal in this sort of mindset is to make it to this final platform of an anti-racist field or department. But when you take that staircase towards equity, you're not meant to leave diversity behind you. You're not meant to leave inclusion and access on the stairs behind you, right? These are all tools that need to be on this journey together as we are creating anti-racist communities and departments and institutions, so that we can start doing science that is representative of society, because that is the goal. The rest of these are tools and things that we absolutely need to incorporate in order to get there. But our goal needs to be science representative of society. And I think that often gets left behind or forgotten in the sort of buzzwords of, 10 years ago it was diversity, 5 years ago it was all inclusion, and now I think it's mostly anti-racism. And so I think keeping in mind that this is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to really represent and give back to societies that we're meant to serve. And so now I sort of want to move to the storytelling process of this. And so this sort of comes back to our need, or more simply put, why does science need more? And so I want to show or tell three different ways that I've seen diverse communities or scientists influence the scientific community around them. And so this is not meant to be an exhaustive list by any means. The hope is actually that others can identify how they've seen this play out in their lives, in their communities, be them in their scientific communities or otherwise, and then can reimagine other scenarios or ways that their identities have influenced their work. So I'm going to share three stories where I've seen the power of interaction, representation, and pursuit as a direct result of moving equitable science forward. And so we'll start thinking about interaction. So how diverse scientists or diverse scientific communities can interact with communities impacted by that question in more reliable and authentic ways. So this is Cerro Chucanti. This is an isolated mountain range reaching elevations above 1,400 meters in Panama. So this is a cloud forest tropical ecosystem where rainfall is heavy and condensation is persistent. So these are personal pictures. I've had the honor to visit this forest on multiple occasions during my fieldwork in Panama. And so just to orient us a little bit, so this is where Cerro Chucanti lies. So it is basically bordering the Panama and Darien provinces in Panama. And so this forest actually has been isolated for millennia. And so this is an interactive map. I have the link here. I would definitely recommend going and checking it out. But so currently what we know is that less than 1% of Earth's landmass consists of cloud forests, but it's thought that they harbor at least 15 diversity. And so this here that I'm actually pointing out, that is Cerro Chucanti. And so what we know is that the Andes, which stretch all along the Pacific coast of South America, and Cerro Chucanti have been isolated for quite a while. And this geographic isolation of this mountain range has resulted in incredible differentiation of the flora and fauna in the Cerro Chucanti ecosystem. And so now I want to introduce you to a friend, someone I really admire. So this is Guido Berguido. He is a Panamanian biologist, conservationist, and executive director of NGO Adapta Bosque. And so I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of seconds. But he describes himself as a biologist by training, an expedition leader by accident, and a conservationist by heart. And so he's an avid bird watcher. He's led several expeditions. This was the first time that I got to follow him up into this cloud forest back in 2016. And so this place he has been working with for over 20 years. He is an incredibly passionate human. And so essentially about 20 years ago, he was visiting this forest on a regular basis. And over time, what he realized was that every time he would go back, the land in the surrounding area was being cleared because people needed that space for cattle ranching and to make a living. And so this is some of the land leading up to what is Cerro Chucanti. And so he started talking to local community members. He started talking to local cattle ranchers and asking them about their needs. And over time, he essentially found out that each tree that was being cleared was going for about $10. And so in speaking with local community members, he realized, like, we can come to a compromise here. We can figure something out with this. And so over 20 years later, this has led to an incredible organization called Adapta Bosque. I really encourage y'all to check them out and look at all of their work. So he's worked with the local indigenous communities in the area, the Embera. He's worked with local cattle ranchers and community members in the area. And with this coordination, communication, and involvement between these communities, Guido has been able to facilitate and provide work and resources that benefit everyone involved in the area. And it's really these intersections of these different aspects of his identity as a Panamanian, a conservationist, a provider, a bird watcher, that produced what I think is an exceptional example of what we need more of in biodiversity and conservation work. So to date, there have been about a dozen endemic and or critically endangered species that have been identified in the forest of Cerro Chucanti. It is now a designated protected area, and all of the cattle ranchers in the area are also involved in any and all work that happens in the surrounding areas, including any sort of groups that go up for expeditions, any sort of field work that happens up there directly involves and gives back to those communities. And so I think this is an excellent example of how these different aspects of our identity can really create incredible opportunities for different folks involved. So again, I just encourage you to check out and follow the work that they've been doing down in the Cerro Chucanti area of Panama. Okay, so now I want to move to thinking about representation, and I think this is probably the one that we all maybe see a little bit more in our daily lives. And so thinking about how diverse scientists or diverse scientific communities can represent different societies, communities, values, and needs, again, in usually more authentic and reliable ways. And so I think one of the barriers I still see often, and I think most people do, is in thinking about access and equity in EEB fields revolves around field work and what can often be unsafe environments due to power imbalances, racism, and sexual harassment. And so I think this has been getting more attention lately, but has always been sort of a persistent and pervasive problem. And one of the biggest sort of communities that this has come out from is the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, which is where I've been doing my research for close to 10 years now. And so this article was released not too long ago, and it was highlighting the most recent allegations of sexual misconduct, harassment, and assault at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. This was brought to light by an incredible group of strong women. And so I think this tends to be one of the biggest untalked about barriers in thinking about how we can make safe, inclusive environments for minority scientists in EEB spaces. And so what I think is incredible are some of the groups that have come out of these tragedies. And so what I'm showing here are two groups that one I think is much more, people are much more aware of. The other I want to bring a little bit of light to. So these are two groups that have come out of intense tragedies. They were put together as grassroots organizations to really highlight the sort of unsafe practices that many historically excluded groups face in EEB fields. And so this is, of course, the group Black Birders Week. And so this was started when Christian Cooper was harassed due to racism on the same day that George Floyd was murdered back in 2020. It spurred intense action and what is now known as Black in X. So there are about 80 different groups that are a part of this. So Black in genetics, Black in microbiology. And so they've been doing some really incredible work in thinking about how we can make both field work and just EEB field, the field in general, a safer place to be, a more inclusive place to be for scientists of color and scientists who have been historically marginalized. I want to point out the organization here. So this was started by groups of graduate students, undergraduates, fellows, interns, all folks who have been or are at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute as a way to make the administration start enacting actual structural changes that can address some of the power imbalances that lead to assaults, harassment, and stereotypes, threats. And so I think this is a really clear example of why it's so important that diverse groups of people are able to come together to represent those who or maybe don't fit the gender identities that are normally recognized, don't fit sexual orientation identities that are normally recognized, don't fit racial or linguistic identities that are normally recognized. And so each of these groups has sort of taken in as many different folks as they can, right, to really represent what the diversity of their communities really need. And so both of them, I think, are doing really incredible work in sort of really changing structural dynamics within their fields and their institutions. And so I have links to both of these at the end, but you can also Google both of these and find out more information about what they're doing. And so this leads me to that last one that I've seen in my own life. And so this is the ability to pursue questions and problems based on unique perspectives. And so it's been shown that diverse and inclusive scientific teams tend to generate new research questions as well as methodological and analytical approaches. And so the story that I want to share next is about how aspects of my identity have directly influenced my research. And so these are my parents. This is my mom with me back in the early 90s. This is my dad sporting what no one will ever convince me was not the best hairstyle to come out of the US in the 70s. But so I'm biracial. So my dad is Black and my mom is Hispanic. Both of her parents immigrated from Mexico. And you know, I never was quite sure that I wanted to do science, but I tried a lot of different things because I got bored very easily. And so it actually wasn't until I started grad school that I really kind of knew what I wanted to do. And so I lucked out in that I got an opportunity to go to Panama for a field course as part of a 2-year fellowship that I was awarded. And that changed everything for me. It was the plane ride to Panama was the 3rd time that I had ever been on a plane. The first 2 times were going to grad school and then coming home from grad school. And so I was truly intrigued and enamored by everything. but especially by this metallic tortoise beetle here. And so I would later learn that this metallic tortoise beetle came in a few different color pattern variants. And so these are just a couple of the ones that I'm showing here. So we now know that they have 5 genetically inherited color pattern variants. And so one of the staff scientists that I had been talking to had been observing these beetles for years and hypothesized that they were the same species. And I was immediately enamored by these beetles and wanted to pursue understanding the maintenance of this variation as my dissertation work. But so when I first started studying this species 7 years ago, I was told by some members of the community that this was not worth my time, that I should not be pursuing this, and that there was no way that these species were related. And so that was really hard to hear as a first-year graduate student. It was incredibly intimidating, but the argument just never made sense to me. So people were telling me that these could not be related because they look too different. And every time someone would tell me that, I would say, well, you should see me and my sister. So this is my sister. We're both biracial. So I took after my dad with darker skin and kinky curly hair, and my sister took after our mom with much fairer skin and much lighter hair. And we've been told our whole lives that we look too different to be sisters. And so this is my reality. Because of my background and aspects of my identity, it never occurred to me that 2 individuals might have to be unrelated because they look different. And because of this, I was able to pursue this line of questioning unhindered by the same doubts that so many were holding them back. And so I think, it's important to say, as scientists, our statistical analyses should certainly be objective. But as people pursuing passions, I think we have to stop pretending that these are anything but subjective, and that there's value in that, because it changes the kinds of questions we're willing to pursue in science, and that ultimately is more honest reflection of the society that we're meant to serve. And so just in bringing this back, what I hope is that when you're having dinner later this evening or doing whatever it is you do on the weekends, that you'll have moments of inspiration where you see how aspects of your identity have played out in your own life, or how they can play out in your own life, and how these influence the science that we choose to pursue, and why that's so important for thinking about how we can produce science that is actually representative of society. And so with that, there are some references here from some of the work that was cited, and then I want to acknowledge all of the incredible people and communities who have supported me on this journey. And with that, I'd be so happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lynette, for that really amazing talk. And yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm stepping in. Susanna had to run, so I will moderate the Q&A. So if you have questions for Lynette, please type them in the Q&A. And while folks are doing that, I guess I'll just start with a question for you. Yeah, so at the start of your talk, you mentioned the role of subjectivity. And in Western science, we so often hear about the goal of science needs to be neutrality, needs to be objectivity. And it's this almost dominant tenet. And I was wondering if you could speak a little your views on the role of subjectivity in EEB, or if you even think neutrality and objectivity are even goals we should be sort of pursuing and at the level in which we do.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think it's something as scientists, we want to be able to claim that. And I mean, I've always wondered, how true is that really? Think about some of the questions we've been answering for hundreds of years, right? They were all because somebody liked that bird, or somebody, came from a background that made them think this way. And so we've claimed neutrality, but how often has it actually been there, right? And so I think really allowing ourselves to question yourself too, to think about why am I interested in this? Why do I think this? Why is this my hypothesis, right? What in my background or my perspective has shaped what I'm seeing here and where can this go? I think there's a lot of value to that. I think that's also why it's important that as scientists, we're constantly in communication with other scientists, right? Because we're the ones sort of able to like check each other or question one another and say, like, that's a really great hypothesis. I don't see how you got there, right? Like, how different would it have been if some of those people who told me, like, I don't think those beetles are related, this project is a waste of your time, had just said, tell me more about why you think that, right? And so I think, yeah, so I think it's important to recognize that our science is subjective because it's us pursuing what we're passionate about, and to make sure that we're just constantly in communication with other scientists.
Yeah, thank you for that, sharing that, your views on that with us. We have a few questions coming in the Q&A. So an anonymous attendee asks, could you reflect on the difference between Panama and the US with regard to diversity in ecology and evolutionary biology, not including STRI?
Yeah, definitely. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the important things to keep in mind too, especially for like, you know, like people like me, where I do my research in a different country than where I'm born, right? And so Panama has different issues and it's grappling with, in the way the US has its own issues that it's grappling with. And so a lot of the biggest issues in like EEB fields or scientific fields in general in Panama is extreme sexism. And so it tends to be very difficult for Panamanian women, especially younger Panamanian women, to like doing things like field work. There are a lot more barriers to that than I think there are like in doing certain types of field work in the US. And so I think being cognizant of that and doing what we can to like provide a platform and to amplify the voices of those people affected in that area. There was something, I was in a talk a couple weeks ago that someone said to me that I just found so beautiful. His name was Brian Dewsbury, and he's from the Caribbean, and he's been working in the States for 20 years or so. And he's put it in a way that he is able to address aspects of racism in the US that many Black Americans can't, because it's so emotionally like close to our heart and is difficult to discuss in some ways. And so he has this like privilege of being able to provide the voice for those people who just get overwhelmed by it. And so I think about that a lot with my work in Panama, and how I can perhaps be that for Panamanian women who, you know, want the same opportunities to do science without harassment, without without that same sort of stereotype. And so, yeah, I think that's a good question. I could talk about it all day. But yeah, I think it's just being cognizant of the sort of issues that are taking place in whatever community you're doing your work in.
All right, so we have another question in the Q&A. When it comes to DEIJ at R1 universities, often struggle with getting folks to put themselves in the shoes of those of a different race, economic class, etc., so they can better address problems of diversity and inclusion. What do you suggest as a method for getting folks to think this way? What are some suggestions you have for helping influence change?
So like helping people see something from another perspective.
Yeah, I think that's what this question is getting at.
Oh, I think that's the thing. The thing about that too is here's what it is. We're all people, right? Like, yes, I'm a biracial woman and have had like very different experiences than say a white man, but you've had some sort of experience where you felt like something didn't go your way and it was not necessarily like at the fault of your own, or you were seen a particular way even though you were not trying to come across that way. And so I think really forcing people, or like suggesting people like really sit down and think about cases in your life where like you could see why, like, okay, this situation here didn't turn out this way. Maybe it was because of XYZ, right? Reflection, I think, is so important. And I just don't think it's something that we do enough, because it's hard, right? To really think about like, how have I been privileged in certain ways, or how have I been discriminated against in certain ways. But I think that's what it always comes back to, for me at least, is that we're all people and we've all had some sort of experience that like left us feeling negative for probably quite a while. And so thinking about that and then sort of extrapolating it for, like, let's say now you're a person of color or a trans person in the field, like how might adding on these different identities really affect some of the outcomes of certain experiences. That's what I would suggest for that.
Yeah, reflection.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we have the next two questions are somewhat similar, so I'm going to ask them together, and it also is kind of something that I was thinking about asking as well. So first from Jenny, who you mentored back at UIUC in Bio 150. Jenny says, well, first of all, Jenny, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
So Jenny's wondering how one would begin getting involved in diversity work as they're beginning grad school. And then we have another attendee ask about, as an early grad student, what gave you the drive, the confidence to push, to continue to pursue studying beetles despite pushback. And I think this kind of all revolves around what advice would you give to early career folks who are interested in these themes and want to do this type of work, incorporate it into even their academic work? And yeah,
I think those are great questions. I think the biggest, truly, like the reason that I am like here today doing anything is because Juana had an exceptional mentor. And so it didn't start out that way. She let me join her lab because I wanted to keep studying these beetles. But she was the person that said, yes, tell me why. I explained, and then she said, perfect, let's design an experiment to test that. And so having her as a mentor, Carla Cassidas, people know her, she's great, is like why I was able to continue pursuing this research. And so what I would say to early graduate students is, like, fine, you don't need everyone in the world to like have your back. It'd be great, right? But you need a small group of people who will go to bat for you, right? And so I had that in my advisor. The STRI organization, the grassroots organization, that was founded by me and a couple of other graduate students at the time. And so that was just like 5 of us who felt similarly, who felt like we had no one really to talk to about it but each other. And so, you know, we would sit in a room, in a friend's living room, and really think about, okay, what are ways that we can change things, even in like the smallest way. It might be like, this person made me feel some kind of way, and then we would sit there while, you know, supporting each other to write an email to say something about it. And so just really finding people who are going to support you. And so that might not be necessarily in your department, right? You might want to think about joining a group like SACNAS or one of the Black and X groups. So I found like a lot of support, honestly, virtually, especially since COVID has hit, and sort of being able to really connect with other Black scientists. And so that would be my biggest sort of piece of advice or recommendation for early graduate students, is a mentor who will support your ideas and help you make them better is going to make all of the difference. And even just a small group of people who you can really count on will make all of the difference.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, so another question in the chat or in the Q&A, thinking about the group that spoke up about sexual harassment at your field station, could you speak about the administration's reaction and if there were any institutional changes that occur?
Oh yes, I've got so many thoughts on that. So one of the biggest ironies. So for something like 12 years, so I've been working at STRI for close to 10 years. For something like 12 years, folks have been wanting to start a climate survey. So just survey everyone, ask about how safe do you feel? How welcome do you feel in all of these different scenarios? Very things that should be happening regularly at just about every institution, right? And at every point over the 12 years that there had sort of been like a door shut in everyone's face on that. Just this sort of idea like, well, nothing's happening here and we don't need to know about it kind of deal. And so one of the things that sprung from this group becoming much more public and from the amazing women who made this story public is that now administration couldn't say no, right? And so we have actually been able to get out our first climate survey. We had over 1,000 people answer the survey. So people who had been at Strive for any amount of time. And so, yeah, I think that's an example of like, you know, people had tried and tried and tried for a really long time to make something happen with that. And administration was not super supportive. But like once momentum got out, once the public's attention was sort of all eyes on Strive for a while is what it was, that's when like we were sort of given the power to really be able to make some kind of changes. And so momentum is still going with that, which is great. And so there are a lot of different like structural changes that are happening with that institution. So yeah, it's a great question.
So I think we have a little time, a little more time. There's another question in the Q&A from John Vandermeer. Do the beetles live only in cloud forests, or can they be found in local traditional agricultural systems?
I always love when there's a question about the beetles. Yeah, so they actually they're found in a lot of different areas across Panama. So I think it's about traditional agriculture systems. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if they're found in traditional agricultural systems, but so they're often found in like so they eat a lot of vining plants, and so they tend to grow in like they also grow in like lowland areas. I spent a lot of time around trash dumps because that's where they seem to do particularly well. So yeah, they can. I don't only just work in cloud forests, unfortunately. I work in other areas as well.
All right, so I guess I'm going to end with one question, and we can wrap up the day. And I want to kind of go back a little bit to this idea of self-reflection that you brought up, and how much you think the formal EEB curriculum needs to evolve in order to promote, or change in order to promote more self-reflection or more critical thought about the social aspects of science, or do you see this work being more decentralized or through informal spaces?
That's such a great question. Well, so I kind of think EEB curriculum needs to change a bit, not even just in thinking about self-reflection, but in thinking about so many other aspects of equitable, inclusive work, even just thinking about mentorship, right? Like as a third-year graduate student, no one ever trained me to mentor an undergraduate field assistant. And so I think there are some things that need to change in terms of what kind of training are we actually providing to students, and are we actually providing them with the tools that will allow them to thrive in like all kinds of contexts where their research might take them. And so I'm thinking about self-reflection. I think there are some ways that we can incorporate this a little bit more. And I think everyone has different sort of graduate experiences. I did very little writing as a graduate student outside of like a grant or an academic paper, right? And so I pursued all of these other projects that I was interested in, my inclusion paper and all of the other papers. But I think providing space where students can start to explore other aspects that maybe aren't super directly related to their science. So some sort of like seminar class where it's writing based, but it's not necessarily writing a grant. Maybe you're writing a response piece or a critical thought piece. And so I think that will provide the sort of space and the growth that we need to like start thinking about what is self-reflection, how do I do that, and why do I need to do that? You know, I think we can start providing the tools for students, even in thinking about the undergrad level, right? Like where do we provide students space to start like self-reflecting in their assignments or their papers or their projects. So yeah, I do think there is definitely room for growth in thinking about EEB curriculum. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Lynette, for your time today, your thoughtful answers, sharing that with us. Nick, as well, thank you for your talk and spending this time with us. We, as an EEB community at University of Michigan, are incredibly grateful to have had this time with you today. And I think this is going to conclude our day 2 of the symposium. Let's give our speakers a hand again. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone in the audience who has joined us here today. We'll be back next week at the same time on Friday with talks from Dr. Sabrina Shirazi about ecological research on stolen indigenous land, and from Dr. Karen Bailey on centering our humanity in ecology and environmental studies to support inclusion, justice, and equity. And for those in the audience, make sure to register if you haven't already, and we look forward to seeing you all back here next week to continue this conversation. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. So bye, everyone.
Thanks again, everyone. Bye.